So let's hook into it. So Troy, we've got you here because you sent through a whole bunch of really insightful questions, and there's more we want to get through with you. So I know there's a number of things you're wanting to chat about, and we're going to talk about shifting polarity. So do you want to lead in with that?
Yeah, sure. So this is something that I learned about after I'd written the first draft of my novel. I'd never heard of it before, but I found out it through the Story Grid podcast. I think Bryn's spoken about that before. And really it's just this whole idea that that it's into positive and negatives. A character starts somewhere. So say they start in a bad situation, they're going through the chapter. Do things get worse for them or do they get better? And the whole idea is that you don't just have them on this even plane the entire time. So you can have it for the story all around, but I always think about it now as a more character thing. So something bad happens to a character. You don't want bad things to continue happening endlessly, because I think the readers will just get sick of that. Like if it just goes bad, worse, they just get tired of it. So it's that whole idea of giving a bit of hope, taking it away, bringing it back. And sometimes just that helps pull the rug out from readers as well, I think. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear if you guys have heard of that before or you use any of that in your writing.
I don't know whether I mean, I hadn't heard of it as in, switching polarities.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I can understand the logic and the concept. Do I deliberately think about doing that with my characters? No. Yeah. As listeners to the podcast will no doubt know, I'm a pantser for the most part. I am forced to plot for certain circumstances with respect to if I'm writing a mystery, and there has to be a certain amount of plotting. My latest book, High Acuity, there has to be a certain amount of plotting because it was done over 13 hours. So you've got to make sure that everything slots in. But do I think about how that character is going to flip-flop with their bad and good things happening to them in that scene, that chapter, that novel? No. I just write to see how it goes. I mean, I do tend to, I think the Stephen King thing of throwing your characters into a situation and seeing how they pan out is generally how I will write things. And so that does, I mean, you have your characters, you've got an idea of what they will do, and how they'll react to certain circumstances. But I think getting too prescriptive then, for me at least, removes a lot of the creativity, a lot of the flow, a lot of the sort of potential for just going off in different directions. And so it would be, I'd feel like I'd be writing in a straitjacket if I'd say, right, this has to happen, this happens to happen. I've got to do a positive and negative thing for that person in that scene. I don't think that would work for me. But
yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, because I do the same as you, pantser, write intuitively. I never really thought about those things. So it's only in that sort of editing or reading afterwards then I think, okay, is this a good concept to even, include?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah, but what about you, Jack?
The way I've it's kind of been described to me is the advice I was given was that any good story is told through the eyes of the character. It's about the journey of the character. Like a lot of detective stories, oftentimes you've got these kind of cliche cardboard cutout detectives and they're pretty flat and there's nothing stands out about the actual characters. And, it's about them catching the bad guy and catching the serial killer, and they do. And, it's more about the forensics and all the investigative techniques that are used. But the actual driving force, behind the detectives is pretty flat. And then you have other ones where the detectives really shine, and it's their story that makes, the story is about them, even though they're trying to catch a serial killer. So that's kind of the advice that's been given to me, is that your story is driven through your character, and that any good story should have your main character changing. There should be some sort of significant shift or change, or as a result of their journey. The advice that was given to me was, if your character at the end of the story is exactly the same as the character who they were at the beginning of the story, it's not a very powerful narrative. That there has to be something that's occurred to them that's changed the way they see the world. And I kind of look at the way I did that. So for my first book, The Angels Wept in the crime series, you had this detective who was kind of just in the, going through routine kind of police work and was kind of just almost in autopilot. and suddenly he's thrust into this investigation as a homicide, and he has to interview the kids who'd witnessed their parents being killed, and that rocked him to the core, and he becomes so immersed in that investigation, and he suddenly became personal, and right to the very end when the climax where his own family is now in danger. And even though I didn't do it intentionally, I'd like to think that by the end of the story, who he is at the end is vastly different to who he was at the beginning. And then I kind of carried that theme through book 2, and particularly book 3, where he almost becomes a vigilante. He's on the cusp of, he no longer has faith in the justice system. Does he have to take matters into his own hands? He really enters a dark world. So, if you start looking at where Jared O'Connor was from the beginning of book 1 to where he is at the end of book 3, there's been a significant change in who he is and how he sees the world. So that's so even though it's not an up and down kind of, ebbs and flows, for me, it was a progressive shift in him over a long period of time, so that when you compare him from the start to the finish, they're two almost completely different people because of what he's been exposed to, and he's been worn down by the world and some of the evil things that he's had to experience. So that for me is kind of how I interpret, Polarity in terms of the character's journey.
Yep. I'd say, yeah, you're always going to have some sort of, well, you'd hopefully not have a character that's going to go and not be influenced by the passage of your book. You may have some little bit characters but they're not going to be there throughout the whole book. So you are going to have some bad things happening to people, and it depends. I mean, if you look at the characters who get murdered, that's a pretty bad thing to happen to them, and not much positive comes out of it because that's it. So it's yeah. As I say, I can understand the concept, and I could also say that is something that would come into the editing process, where you go through and go, okay, is there enough in this character? Do they need to be here, or what is their role? Have they got any role in this? Can we get rid of them? And that's sort of a more of an editing process. But I think for me, a lot of the time, those sort of structure or flow structural edits and things like that, I do on the fly as I'm going through, because I will read over what I've written repeatedly as I go through. So and then I'll carry on writing, and so that sort of, and I also get a lot of feedback as I'm writing it from the boss, my alpha reader, and she'll sort of like go, yeah, this is rubbish, move it, you got to do this, you got to do that. So I have the advantage of having a constant structural edit that's going on with what I'm writing. So
a question for you, Troy. So with your book, Head Grenade, your main character, Manny, in terms of, he has a number of setbacks, and just when things are thinking like they're going well, there's another setback, and but he starts off in a pretty dark place. And I wouldn't say that at the end of it he comes out, it's all rainbows and butterflies and unicorns for him. His life is there's still a lot of turmoil, but there's a shift towards hope, and now he's got a greater sense of purpose in his life. So that was the change I saw in your character. So how do you kind of see that in terms of your main? So for me, I know, Harry, you talked about kind of more secondary characters, but for me, this is more about your protagonist, who is telling the story. The story is through their eyes, and the story is about them. It's about their journey. So it's about what sort of change can you show that your character has gone through. So with your character, Troy Manny, do you think, what I've sort of said and described from a reader's point of view, is that kind of how you saw it in writing that character?
Yeah, it was. I mean, and it's hard because a lot of this is done intuitively. I think you guys are probably the same with what you're doing, because I wasn't honestly quite sure what I was doing at first, but I guess just from, absorbing.
There's the honesty.
Yeah. But, absorbing thousands of movies and books, like we've got all that. So I think there's just that innate part of you that knows what things are meant to be like as in story and how that should flow. But yeah, for this character, I did have to change things. So I didn't want it just to be hopeless. So that whole idea of having hope was important, because that's ultimately was going to redeem everything and pull him out. But yeah, things still continually go wrong and things get weird, and there's a lot going on there at times. But I tried to end on a positive note. Didn't want it to be all doom and gloom. If there's only one thing and you've got, and it's hope, I think that's a good thing.
So you wanted to talk us through the notion of the five commandments and the three act structure. Do you want to talk us through what you meant by that?
Yeah, sure. So this is another thing. This Five Commandments is something that came again from an editor, Lauren, when I went through with her. And they're meant to be these, components of a controlling idea and good parts of storytelling. So the first one is the inciting incident. And so that's something that disrupts the character's normal life. Next is progressive complication, which is, where the conflict escalates. Then there's crisis, which can be, there's normally a question being asked, like, does the character have to do something or achieve something? And the climax is the answer to that question. And then finally, the resolution, where it's all resolved. So that's almost this simplistic way of thinking about it. It seems like most big stories, you can a lot of famous different stories, you can break down into these five sort of moments. Sure, there's a lot around it, but yeah.
So I know you've got some examples of that, but the reference to the three act structure, I actually had to Google it because I wasn't sure. But I think is the three act structure is more of a simplified version. It's just defined as the setup is number one, number two is the confrontation, and number three is the resolution. So is that how you see it? That the three act structure is more of a simplified version of the five commandments?
Yeah, I think so. And it's just this beginning, middle, and end. And I never thought about doing that before again, but say you have an 80,000 word book, they suggest, 20,000 is in the beginning, 40,000 in the middle, 20 at the end, and you sort of break those up. And it's an interesting way to do it. I've just never thought of doing that. So it just gives you different ways of thinking about it. But I'm not really into, look, honestly, my mind doesn't work linearly either, right? No. So I go all over the place, put things together. So, if it works for you, it works. But I think it's more for plotters, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, we're missing having Bryn on because he is the sort of like archetypal plotter, and he would understand all of this stuff and has probably spent a lot of time looking into it, and coming up with and I'm certain that all of his books will have the five commandments and everything else sort of structured. I mean, I understand the concepts and stuff like that, and if you don't have if you try and write a book with just a beginning, then it's going to be pretty boring. So to say, your book has to have a beginning, middle, and end is just like, it's a book. It's like it needs a cover on. Yep, it does. It's like
you knew that since you heard the story of the three bears or anything as a kid. Like you grow up knowing that that's how those things work. But it's just to give it structure. But yeah, also I don't really abide by many of these things. I just thought it'd be wondering if you guys did. So.
Bryn does.
For me, it's interesting. I think I just started doing it instinctively. I think when you do a lot of reading of novels, you start to get a feel for what the author's doing and how they set the story up and how it kind of builds, and there's that rising tension, even if it's keeping the reader turning the pages by dropping a cliffhanger at the end of each chapter, keep the reader guessing. Keep the reader engaged so they want to keep going and they want to see where the story ends up. And I think the risk with anyone who's written a full-length novel is they talk about the saggy middle, where you get to a point where, and I think this is where I'm struggling with my current manuscript. I kind of feel that the chapters I'm trying to push through are getting a bit saggy, and I need to add more content to spice up the story a little bit more. So I think that's a real risk. But this is, for me, I think writing a full-length novel is not something everyone can do, because people who do this stuff, whether you deliberately, plot and you follow this three-act structure and you're very scientific in the way you approach the storyline, or for me, and probably you guys is probably the same, where we do it more by feel and we just do it because it feels right to set up the story, rising tension, something happens, and then there's all these things that happen, and then you finally work your way towards a climax and a resolution. And I think that just kind of comes naturally. I think it is a real craft. I think it's also a gift to be able to do that over the course of 90,000 words. But for me, I think I was doing it already based on what I'd learned through reading, and then when I discovered the three-act structure and the five commandments and saw these graphs, and there's a lot of science around it, I'm thinking, I kind of think I'm already doing that anyway, because that's the makings of a good story. So for me, I don't think I did it knowingly or intentionally. I just kind of did it instinctively. And when I look back retrospectively, the way I've been writing my stories probably still fits in with that five commandments anyway. That's kind of for me. What about you, Harry?
Look, as I say, I try and most of it is pantser writing, and so to try and say, I mean, I couldn't imagine writing a book and going, oh right, I've got to 20,000 words now. I'm now got to move on to the second commandment or whatever. You know, it's just like, nah, I haven't told the story yet. You know, my first book, Dead Regular, there was a long build-up because it was a murder mystery, and you've got to look at the genres as well, because certain genres require certain. You know, if you have a murder mystery but don't have any red herrings and you've got one suspect, it's not much of a mystery, and so you've got to build all of these possible people that could be the murderer. And you've got to bring the reader along and have them thinking, well, who is it? Could it be this person? Could it be that person? And that takes time. And so, yeah, I'd say I haven't actually done the actual numbers and figures and stuff like that. But I know that Dead Regular was about 105,000 words. And I'd probably say that the build-up was, I'm guessing now 80. And then everything goes really fast, and then you get the climax, and then resolution all sort of like hit come down, because that's just the structure the book was required, because you had to have all of these different sort of people that he was meeting. And then, you know, if you've got somebody who's a serial killer who's killing people off, you've got to meet certain people first of all before they get killed off, so you have that connection with the victims. If you just get a report on who's been killed, you don't get that connection, and so that takes time to write. And so I can understand that you do have those parts, but I think because they're so amorphous, there's no, you know, actually assigning percentage of your book should be in that commandment, I think would be a bit silly, because a lot of it will depend on the genre and the style of your writing and other things.
Maybe to put it into context, Troy, you had some examples. I know I saw you'd written up some examples relating to how this 5-act structure, or the 5 commandments, fits in with The Wizard of Oz and Star Wars, the first Hope, the episode 4 of Star Wars. Just talk us through. This might kind of put it into context and help people understand how it's applied.
Yeah, so I mean, both of these, I think, with particularly the Star Wars, also does that hero's journey thing, and it's just interesting that, you know, stories all subscribe to these, you know, certain styles. But if we just go through these, right, you know, The Wizard of Oz, the inciting incident is, you know, Dorothy gets, you know, thrust into the land of Oz. The progressive complication is, you know, she goes with the guys and discovers that, you know, Oz isn't this wizard, can't grant wishes or anything like that. So then this brings her to this crisis. So does she quit and stay in Oz, or does she try to find her way home? And so that's this thing of there being a question. And then, you know, the climax is her trying to find her way home. And the resolution is she gets home. And I mean, that's a really simplified version of that, but of the story, you know, there's not much into it when you speak about it in those terms. But it's still
the story, is it?
Yeah, but, you know, when it fits like that. And
sure there was witches involved, but I can't.
There's definitely a couple of witches in there.
One of the witches gets a house dropped on her, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, tell us about how's it worked with Star Wars.
Yeah, I thought you'd like this one. I did this one especially for you. So the inciting incident is, you know, young farm boy Luke Skywalker discovers messages in a droid and leads him to join these rebels. The progressive complication is that, you know, he uncovers Princess Leia's distress, and there's all these threats from this empire. And so the crisis then becomes, you know, does he stay home, or does he, you know, embrace his destiny as this Jedi and go rescue her? And which brings him then to the climax where, you know, attack the Death Star with the allies, and the resolution is they win with all the rebels. And, you know, he continues his training, and the resolution of that is it hints towards, you know, the other stories. So, and it's just interesting because, like you guys, I did a lot of things intuitively or by instinct, and I didn't really think about applying this stuff. And part of me is a little bit wary sometimes to put too much you learn and force it onto what you're doing, because not to go, oh, the art must not be touched, or, you know, my words are perfect. But, you know, there's just something you think, well, you did it without that help before and it was okay. So do you need that now? That sort of thing, you know? It's like, you know, Harry, with the, you know, the slow burn thing, and you put all those things in there that you just knew instinctively to do, red herrings, and then, when you decide you want to put on the accelerator and,
Bang,
you do that right at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
You look at that breakdown of Star Wars, and you go, well, a large proportion of the book was up to the crisis point.
Yeah. Yeah,
shooting the Death Star was one of the last scenes.
Yeah.
So there is that flexibility within that model that different parts can be very expansive.
Yeah, and even they try and. Sorry, Jay, I was just going to say they were talking about in this story grid thing about each chapter could be like that or whatever, which I found that was too much for me to go, okay, each chapter to have, an inciting incident, progressive complication, and then all resolved. That doesn't work for me. I'm sure.
How does a cliffhanger work there? Because a cliffhanger by definition has not been resolved.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Yeah, some of this stuff you can take too far and get into, Excel spreadsheets and just doing ridiculous stuff. But
sounds like Bryn.
Which has its place. That's fine. Yeah, if it works for you.
Yeah, I mean, if you were going to do the 5 commandments within each chapter, that's what's called an anthology, because they're short stories. Because you resolve the short story at the end, and then the next one has no connection to the last because it's been resolved. So you can do that, but it's then a set of separate stories. I don't see how you would manage to resolve it in each chapter, because otherwise, what's the point of reading on?
Yeah, I mean, it might not be resolved the entire story, just one element, perhaps. I'm not sure exactly, but still,
a very, very complicated way to write. But sure, it can be done.
Yeah.
For me, ultimately, it's about keeping your reader engaged. Really, I mean, that's what we're striving for as writers, aren't we? I mean, that's the bottom line. You want your readers turning the page. You want them to get to the end and say, "Yeah, this book kept me enthralled all the way through," as opposed to, "God, that was hard work getting through." I had, how many times do you hear people saying, I came so close to closing that book, but I'd committed and I just felt I had to keep pushing on, not because I wanted to, but I kind of just felt I had to. Because
Don Quixote.
Yeah. So, I think for me, what you guys are saying, even though there is this model, and I think we all agree, we all do this instinctively and don't scientifically or methodically say, right, we've got to get to a particular word count. Now we need to move into the next phase of the structure. And as you said, Harry, some parts might be longer. You might have a very quick climax of resolution, and the pace of your story really accelerates towards the end. But it might be a bit of a slow build as you're building your characters and building your red herrings. And so, the progressive complication phase might be 60% of your book, and then suddenly the boom, boom, boom. So really, for me, the test is: are you keeping your reader engaged? And does your story make sense? Is your main character on a journey of change? And ultimately, is a good yarn. And if you can tick all those boxes, well, look, again, it's like we've already talked about. A lot of these rules are there to be broken anyway. It's a bit of a guide. I think it's fair to say that if your book does not have these things, probably you are missing important ingredients. But as to how you apply it and in what proportions is entirely up to you, depending on your story.
I mean, a classic example of not having a resolution is where you end up with a book that's a series and they don't resolve the story.
How do you guys feel about that?
I hate
that
it.
Happens. Yeah.
It's like, I've just spent all this time reading a book and you haven't resolved the story.
I think if it's something like Lord of the Rings, where that you read Fellowship of the Rings and that it's part of an overall story, and you get
that's really 3 parts rather.
And that was one book as well, right?
It was one book, and there were 3 parts to it, and it got split into 3 books. But I think it was only ever really supposed to be a single story. And so
I like stories, like going back to your book, Troy. I like stories, and I like to think that with my 3-book series, that each of them there is a resolution. The story comes to an end, but then there's a thread that allows the story to continue into your next book. In mine, there's someone escapes custody and they're still out there, even though a lot of the other issues are resolved. And the crimes are essentially solved, but it provides an opening for the story to continue. But there is closure. I note for your book, Troy, that you've done that. There is closure in the story, but then there's kind of like the final scene, and they're on a plane, and they're kind of thinking about what
Spoiler
next.
alert.
Yeah, that's all right.
But no,
But,
no,
yeah,
no big spoilers
that's
here.
what
But
I
you know,
Oh, okay.
I'm not telling you who lives or dies. Just
Right.
some
Okay.
some
Someone
characters.
dies?
Oh my God.
Some characters are on a plane, but then
Yeah.
there's kind of almost like a hint of what next, and it opens it up to
Yeah.
the possibility of a sequel, even though the story has found its resolution.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean,
sorry, go on.
I was going to say that was in no way like, yeah, it could be open, but I think everything's pretty tied up in that, because I didn't want to do one of those things, because there would be nothing worse than having to wait a few years to read a book for someone if you did leave it on a cliffhanger like that.
Yeah,
it's just infuriating. But
yeah, it's all right if you've already written them all and then you publish all more in one go, but to actually leave it and and be in the process of writing the next one, that's going to be a problem for your readership. Is that you left me this cliffhanger, and I've now don't know what happened. And do they then want to invest in finding out what happened after they've waited a year and read another 30 books in between? It's
well, you see all the series on. So you see all the series on your streaming channels like Netflix and Disney, and ones like there's some of the Star Wars spin-off stories. There was Andor, then there was the House of the Dragon, the Mandalorian, and some of these ones will particularly say the House of the Dragon and the Lord of the Rings prequel. The what's it called now? The
Rings of Power.
Rings of Power, yeah. First seasons came to a close and left it open, and when almost having to wait another year for the second season to drop. And the Witcher was another one where in between the seasons, it's like at least a year it had elapsed. You've got to go back and almost watch it again because you've forgotten,
But the other problem is when they cut the funding.
Yeah, or they don't renew. Yeah, exactly.
Oh yes.
When you've got 3 seasons, you've watched 3 seasons, and it just stops.
Yeah,
those
storylines that were meant to be wrapped up, and they just never do. It's terrible.
That's why I've got real strong commitment issues with watching series. I'm really skeptical. If it's a season, it's going to go into season 2. Because how often do you see that it just funding gets pulled and it's been going into season 4, 5, 6, and then it just kind of stops. And is this story ever going to end? That's why I love if it's a limited series, because it comes to a conclusion. Only yesterday I finished watching a series called The Long Shadow, and it is dead set brilliant. It's based on the 1975 investigation in Yorkshire, the Yorkshire Ripper, based on a true story, and it is an absolute cracker. I was going to say it's a ripper of a story, but it is, and it's over I think 8 episodes. Absolutely brilliant, but it's going to come to a conclusion, and that's what I love about the series.
I'm still bitter about the Sarah Connor Chronicles, because that was 2 seasons and then it just stopped, and there was all of these cliffhangers and everything, and you just like. And they I
thought that was really well received, and people really enjoyed that show.
Yeah,
it was a great show. It's like rated highly, even in the Terminator, series and everything.
Yeah, and then they just cut it, and you're like,
yeah.
And then so are you going to commit to another series? That's why I think I'm not going to. Those commitment issues start creeping back. The other thing I was just going to throw in, like we're talking about, and we will have to wrap up very very soon, talking about applying a more of a scientific model, such as your different structures. We talked about how AI can come into it, and I think earlier we commented around, is it ever going to be possible that AI could write a whole novel? I don't believe so. I think AI has potential in terms of helping writing. For example, ChatGPT, you can ask it to describe something, and it'll describe. You can get it to describe a particular setting, and it'll do that for you. And you might be able to say, and I've kind of toyed with this to see what can this thing do, because I've heard good and bad things about it. Like using the emotion thesaurus or any other writing resource or books on writing. I don't think it's cheating. I think you got to do your research, and if it's going to help you, find more creative ways without plagiarizing, more creative ways to describe certain things.
What you got to ask though is that because of the way the AI works, and ChatGPT especially, it is plagiarizing, because it's
all based on pre-existing works and stuff. Yeah,
exactly. Yes,
existing things. So
exactly. So
then
you have to
if you fed your own books in there, okay, say you feed the Jared O'Connor series in there or whatever, then it knows how to write like, Jack Roney. So you could in theory go, write me a scene, and then it's it's like plagiarizing yourself. It's a slippery slope, and
it
is very lazy. And
a thing that writers do have to be aware of, and I only discovered it recently because I've been uploading short stories onto KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, which is the Amazon for ebooks. Now there's a requirement to tick a box as to whether you've used AI or not.
Okay.
And it's not specific. It's not, did you use it in any way? It's like, has AI been used in the creation, in any form of creation of this submission?
Like a character name even, or something
yes
like
or
that.
no.
Interesting.
So you've got to be a little bit careful, because if you tick that, I don't know what the consequences are of ticking yes, because as I've made a comment before, AI is not copyrighted. You can't copyright anything that's been created by AI. So if you tick that, do you lose your copyright?
Yeah. Was that just disclosure for readers or something? It's like, you're reading this book. It has been. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess that'll get sorted out over the next couple of years or whatever. It's all pretty new frontier at the moment. But yeah.
But for me, really, I just think I don't think AI is ever going to replace the writer's instincts to write a really good yarn. We're talking about applying a model to help you, structure your story. We've talked about how we do this instinctively anyway, and I don't think AI can replace the human brain in the ability to come up with ways to get readers to empathize with characters and to send your character on a journey. Hopefully AI will never get to that point, because it's a really sad day for writers. But I think all the stuff we talked about in terms of applying a model, we do it anyway, and we get a feel for where the story is going as writers, and hopefully by using our instincts and knowing there's a certain journey we want to take our reader through, and the emotional factor. I really my thought is, I don't think AI will ever be able to replace the human brain in terms of coming up with this stuff.
I disagree. I think it will.
Okay, we'll see what happens.
See who wins when Skynet takes over.
What you got to remember is that I think it was only something recently that they were saying that the transistor, which is what the computer was first sort of like started from, was in 1940. It was invented in 1940, and you've now gone from that to computers or an algorithm being able to not only write your book and also design your cover. Yes, okay, it's in its infancy, but give it 20 years, where's it going to be?
Yeah. Right. I still think that approximation of human emotions and things, it can only replicate that. Like, I don't know, it makes me uneasy, mainly because it takes our jobs. But
but I think writers are we're insignificant to the number of jobs that we lost due to it.
Yeah.
So
all right, well,
anyway,
let's
on that happy note,
let's leave on that happy note. The future of writers, we're doomed by AI apparently, if Harry is to be believed.
But then again, as I said, you've always got that connection with your audience, and the AI can't have that unless they're having a robot come in and
so put that. But they can some kind of cyborg thing. I mean, that's next. So
yeah. All right, guys, we're going to have to wrap up. So for those listening to this, Troy, you'll be back with us next episode. We've still got other questions to get through. So
excellent.
Thanks, fellas. Great chat. And we'll see you next time. All the best.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
See ya.
Bye now.